that's got you in trouble and you're releasing them to your family, then chances are you're going to be back. So, yeah, it's we kind of, all right, we kind of create the revolving door, you know.
The pantry.
Yeah. And Russell,
Okay. Yes.
he asked me for y'all's address. I'm going to give it to him.
Okay.
That's okay.
Mark, the pantry's not locking for sunshine.
I know the pantry's not locking.
Okay, well, she thought something was wrong.
Yeah, I think the battery's dead. But I'm not particularly sure about how to change those batteries. I'm leaving that to the other people.
I had emailed both of them. I found a way to email them,
Yeah.
and they both responded.
Yeah. That's
I got
good.
my crock pot, but it wasn't.
Now his brother
But I left the crock
sleeps a
pot.
lot when I'm in there.
I left the
He must
crock
stay
pot
up all
here,
night
so I got
with
it today when we're here
with
Friday.
the card playing crew.
Cool.
Waiting on
Okay.
that. I didn't take off.
But Russell's a little different. I think he's tired. Yeah.
What
I think
he wrote me was encouraging.
I think what happened with his sister has humbled him a lot. So yeah.
He was here for a while too.
Yep. All right. Well, it is 6:30.
Yeah.
Who's missing? Nobody really, huh? Trying to throw the others wander in. Kevin and Matt is usually who's here. So yeah, and your mom had to leave.
Yeah, get Hannah.
Yeah.
So she's gonna try and get Hannah to change her schedules back to 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah, it just sticks her right. It takes all on either side getting her picked up, huh?
Yeah.
Well, let's pray before we begin. And Lord, we just thank you so much for your life and your love and the way that you work in the world. And as this book teaches us, you're always at work, and we don't always see it. We don't always know it until we are able to see things through the eyes of faith, through the eyes of knowing that you are faithful. So we thank you for that because this world is often so misguided and so chaotic that we get caught up in that whirlwind ourselves. And we need a reminder that you are always in control and that you are motivated by your love for us. So help us live in that love each and every day as we serve you and we serve the world around you. Lord, we just be with people that we know are ailing today. We lift up Leslie to you. We pray that everything will be good for her. We lift up our legislature in our state today that is doing the hard work of constructing life in our state by the will of the people. And so we pray that that what we desire is of your will, that is being guided by your hand. We pray for our country and the turmoil that it is in. And we pray that in some way we may see light at the end of this tunnel, but if not, that we are reminded that you are here with us and that your strength and power remains, and that we must sometimes just wait to see what you will do. And you are doing much. And how that all knits together for your glory is what we hope to see. So turn our hearts to yours. Turn our thoughts to you. And we pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.
They're making that ruling before the Supreme Court ruling? I mean, they're making that law?
Yeah, the law in Louisiana was filed before all that, and so they vote on that this week. I thought it was today, but it's sometime this week. I saw Buddy Mincy this morning, and they had other floor votes, but he didn't know about that one. But they were having someone was speaking to the Senate today in regards to the bill, supporting it, but he's in the House, so he wasn't going to be a part of any of that. But they will vote on it's supposed to come to a floor vote pretty quickly because they only have a month left. Just wild. It's hard to believe it. It's already that close to being Well, June the something they're finished, or supposed to be finished. Okay, chapter 5 of Esther. Remember last week we got to the place where, we'll back up a little bit. Mordecai comes to her and delivers this news, and she says, I can't go in to see the king. No way. That's a death sentence. Nobody goes into the king's chambers or to the court without being asked. And he hasn't asked for me for over a month. So she says, I just can't walk in there. And Mordecai says, what do you mean? I said, what makes you think you're going to survive this just because you're the queen? This is an edict for everybody. And besides, he says, who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. So she tells to go fast for how long? 3 days. That 3 days is... it's a number in the Bible. We do a lot of things. 3 represents a lot of things. But for us, as it did for them, 3 days generates in our mind new life. Okay? So we have a little foreshadowing here. Go fast for 3 days, and then I'll do what I need to do. If I perish, I perish. So the 3 days conjures in us new life, of course, but in her mind, this could be the end. This is her way of saying, I'm ready to sacrifice myself, whether or not it produces anything good or not. Totally selfless. In contrast to Haman, who is totally selfish and self-absorbed in everything. So we have this great dichotomy that's presented to us. Okay, and in the midst of that, we'll see as we come up that it seems as though everybody around the king is okay with using him for power, for gain, for all those things, except for Esther. She doesn't seem to want to use him, but she knows that he has the power. And she does respect that power in a way, but she also, at the same time, she behaves as a queen. All right? And we're going to see a contrast between her and between Haman's wife and the difference in these two people too. So the contrast that we have are saying a lot, especially when we get into chapter 6, when we begin to see this whole thing kind of unravel on them. So let's go on in chapter 5. He says, on the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace in front of the king's quarters, while the king was sitting on his royal throne inside the throne room opposite the entrance to the palace. So here you've got this scene. All right, so remember the first time she comes before the queen, she's all gussied up. She got her makeup on. She's been made to look really beautiful. Yeah, before the queen, before the king. Well, now everything's different. She puts on her royal clothes. He's sitting in his chamber. There's this huge doorway in front of him, and she's standing there. Okay, everybody knows the story. She hasn't been asked to come. But here she is in her royal clothes, and she's about to cross that threshold. And anything can happen at that point, okay? And so the stage is kind of set. If this was a movie, you'd have dramatic music and all that playing, because here we are, we're fixing to see, is this going to be a clash, or is this going to be something else? All right? So verse 2 sums it all up. When the king saw Queen Esther, and this is the first time she's called Queen Esther, she's referred to as the queen, but now something is changing, okay? So we see this shift. He says, when he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won favor in his sight. So everybody goes, okay, it's going to be good. He's not going to kill her. Okay, she won favor in his sight. And he held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So remember, she said, I'm going to go in there, and if he doesn't hold out his scepter, I'm a dead woman. But he does. Okay? Once again, he is overtaken by not just the beauty of this woman, okay, but her courage. She really is behaving in a courageous manner now. So we keep adding to the virtues of Esther as we go along. She's proven to be wise. She's beautiful. She's wise. Obviously, she's developed a plan. She, in a world where the king has already declared that a man is supposed to be the head of his house, she's already given Mordecai orders instead of Mordecai giving her orders. And now she's about to reveal some things to the king that he has no idea. So here he is in the dark and she's in the know. So all of these things are happening that should not be happening. And we would look at them and say, oh, it's a strange set of circumstances, or sometimes we say coincidences. But we are beginning to see, especially when we move into chapter 6, none of this can be coincidental.
He has great confidence in her because of the first time she goes to him, she saves his life.
There you go.
Because of
the two eunuchs that were gonna kill him.
because they were going to kill him. So I
Yeah.
mean, when he sees her this time, he probably has this thing. Why would she come knowing?
Right. So there's actually a relationship with them that is built on some sense of integrity, and everybody else around him are users, and they're continually coming to him for something that they need. But she's in need, but that's not the presentation that she's provided. She's presenting herself with the respect of who he is, but with the strength of who she is. That's a good.
But you don't think she's a manipulator? Because she knows how to manipulate the situation.
Well, I think she knows who she is.
Yes.
And if it's manipulation, it's covert, whereas everyone else is pretty overt about what they're doing with this king. They just don't care. They're just and we'll see. Haman just wants him to do his dirty work by order of by creating decrees and laws. So then Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter, meaning I accept the mercy that you have provided me. And the king said to her, "What is it, Queen Esther?" It literally says, "Well, what's with you?" but that was an idiom for being able to say that he senses in her that something's wrong. She's in distress. Okay, so he could have answered her several ways, but the Hebrew idiom that's used here is one of being able to say, "What's wrong? What's up with you? What is your request?" So he says, "What is it? What is your request? It shall be given to you, even to the half of my kingdom." So he doesn't even know what she's there for, and he's ready to give her half of the kingdom. All right. That's a high level of trust that she's there for proper reasons. And Esther said, "If it please the king, let the king and Haman come today to a feast that I've prepared for the king." Then the king said, "Bring Haman quickly so that we may do as Esther has asked." So now Esther's in the lead. Very important. So the king and Haman came to the feast that Esther had prepared. And as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king said to Esther, "What is your wish? It shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled." So you see these doublets there being used. What is your wish? What is your request? It shall be granted. It shall be fulfilled. This just adds power and strength behind the dialogue. He's asserting his power as king in a way that is going to benefit her in her response. Then Esther answered, "My wish and my request," double it again, "is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king," another doublet, find favor and please, "to grant my wish and fulfill my request," another doublet, "let the king and Haman come to the feast that I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king asks," meaning that I will provide him with my request.
I wonder why she did that.
there's a lot of discussion about that. Why did she do that? Did she get cold feet at this moment about what she wanted to say, or for what reason did she do this? Okay, so one commentator says that, well, she may have gotten a little jittery and she needed more time, but she's got a feast to prepare in one day, and so that would be kind of risky to have that short a period of time to entertain the king. This is something that she'd been preparing now for 3 days. The other thing is, did she do it to kind of relax Haman, to catch him kind of off balance when she finally does present the king with the truth about what's going on with her and her people? And so that there's not a lot of time for him to respond, that he's really kind of off balance in the whole situation with the king. The other idea is that, as we see in the 6th chapter, literarily, it kind of sets Haman up to gloat a little bit more. And we see some other things happening in the story. He rushes in chapter 6 to request that the king allow him to impale Mordecai on a pole. And the first thing that he hears out of the king's mouth is, how do I honor a man that's done me so much service? And he immediately goes to his head and begins to think, oh, this is about me, it's about me. And he starts telling him all the stuff to do. So I kind of tend that way, that she does this, and we find that it actually sets Haman up for a greater fall.
That would have been 3 days if her fasting was before the 3 days, before the first meal, or was the fast?
3 days, and then she goes to the king and invites him to the feast. So there's 2 feasts, 1 day right after the other.
Okay.
Yeah. So I tend to see it as a story that is trying to draw attention to the fact that the very prideful are lifted high and fall greatly, and those that are humbled are lifted to great places. So you see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
She doesn't strike me as the type of woman, though, that would want him to gloat more. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't quite. That's like 2 wrongs don't make a right.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I don't buy that as a motivation. Literarily, I think that's what's going on. But for her to do it, about the only thing that you could say is that either she needed a day
Maybe.
to further prepare for what she needed to do to ask the king. Either way, Haman interprets it
Yeah.
completely wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we see that over and over again with Haman, because he's so egotistical and yet so insecure about who he is. He has no identity of his own. So, verse 9, subtitle, Haman plans to hang Mordecai. There's always the next level for Haman in this deal. So, verse 9, and Haman went out that day, joyful and glad of heart. Okay, he's skippity-doo-dah. He's getting everything he wants. He is, when you think about it, the queen, the king, and Haman together, the 3 most powerful people in the kingdom, are having a great feast, and it's only them. I would imagine his head was just going boom, 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 boom. But you got the and at the beginning. He went out, and Haman went out joyful. But dun dun dun, when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he neither rose nor trembled before him, he was filled with wrath against Mordecai. So the order was what? You rose before Haman and you bowed before Haman, and you showed him great respect, and you were fearful of Haman because of his power. And Mordecai, after fasting 3 days, he's probably already discovered that the queen's had this meeting with the king, and he's emboldened. I mean, I'm not standing up for that guy, you know. So this very personal conflict has really created this whole boil over into this thing, but for good cause. So he neither rose nor trembled before him. So he was filled with wrath against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. And he sent and brought his friends and his wife Zeresh. Okay, so he restrains himself. I'm not going to do anything now because I know what I'm going to be able to do later. And Haman recounted to them the splendor of his riches, the number of his sons, all the promotions which the king had honored him, and how he had advanced him above the officials and the servants of the king. So I can imagine this guy, Haman, gathers up his friends quite regularly and his wife and recounts all the wonderful things that have happened to him in the past with the king. Oh, I've just got to tell you how rich I am. I just got to tell you about how wonderful my sons are. And he's just sitting there doing this. Can you imagine, once a week, once a month, however often it is, it's too often. And that's what he's doing. Then he gets to verse 12 and he says, even Queen Esther, let no one but me come with the king to the feast she's prepared. Now, if he only knew that she was a Jew, I mean, it would just change everything that he's doing, but he doesn't. So they're all in the dark. Esther has got everyone, she's about to have everyone doing exactly what she wants to do. And in Haman's eyes, she's the least. She's a woman and she's a Jew. See what God's doing here? He does it over and over again in Scripture. He takes the least and he lifts him up and uses him for the thing that's the greatest. And that's the same thing that he's doing here. He said, and tomorrow also I'm invited by her together with the king. So he's bragging again. He says, not only was it today, we're going to do it again tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow she'll do it again the next day. He's just all into this. But it says in verse 13, yet all this worth is nothing to me as long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. So he spends the evening talking about all this wonderful stuff about his life, and then his mind kind of flashes to Mordecai, and he says, oh, I would get rid of all of this if I could just get rid of Mordecai tonight. I cannot stand the thought of that Mordecai the Jew. Okay, so we see this great arrogance that's turning into rage. Okay, yeah. Well, the hangings have got a different meaning in their day. Hanging by the neck was merciful compared to their kind of. You hung somebody on a tree, Mitch. You impaled them on a tree. So then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, let a gallows 50 cubits high. It's actually, the word there for gallows is a bad translation. Or not bad, but it's really the word for a tree. Eitz is the Hebrew word. So he says, let a tree be erected 50 cubits high, 75 feet high in the air. Yeah, their advice is as voluminated as his bragging. Yeah. It's if you're going to do something with Mordecai, it's got to be as great and as stupendous and magnanimous as you are. Because 75 feet high, the whole city would have seen this thing. Okay. Yeah. So that's the advice they give him. Yeah. set a pole up 75 feet tall with a sharp point on it, and we're going to impale Mordecai so everybody can see. Okay. Then go joyfully with the king to the feast. So it says, before you do anything else, okay, you got to do this. The idea pleased Haman, and he had the gallows made. So he had the tree erected there to do this. So we find here that so all of this is happening. This is all got to be done in the night for this to be accomplished in the morning before there's a feast at noon. So Haman's not getting a lot of sleep. He's busy about taking care of his Mordecai problem. Now, he hasn't asked permission to do this yet, but he's so confident in what the king has in store for him that he can get whatever he wants from the king. See, he's a user. He just knows that if I can go and I can get anything I want from the king. no regard for anything else. And so that's what he's planning on doing. But that same night, and this is the turning point of the whole story right here. You remember I talked about it being a chiasmus, where we have these series of feasts that come down, and they all lead to this one event where King Xerxes has a restless night. And then we see moving out of that a total reversal of everything that's happened before. This is kind of that pinnacle point in it. And of all things, it's a sleepless night. All right? So on that night, the king could not sleep. On that night, that very night, the same night that all this is going on in Haman's house, where he is busy constructing this plan, okay? That same very night, the king could not sleep. Important.
It is, because you never know what God's doing.
That's right.
He was
Because
thinking too.
he's thinking about Mordecai and how wonderful he is, and at the same time Haman's
Plotting against Mordecai.
against him, so, you know.
So how does that come about? When the king is very malleable, he can be made to really do anything and think anything that anybody else does. But now something is happening
So
in the
good has
king,
become evil.
yeah, where it's time to do something good that wasn't done before.
Yeah.
But why wasn't it done before?
Well, that's
Because it was
right.
for this moment that it needed to be done. See, if Mordecai had been honored at the time that Mordecai offered the report of the assassins, then everything that happens in this story wouldn't have happened. If he hadn't had a restless night,
And they read to him.
they read to him from those
Everything
pages.
what Mordecai did, so it was like refreshing his memory. How he
Yeah.
saved his life. And
So we were talking about circumstances before. Here are those coincidences that you really can't overlook,
yeah.
because any one of them missing, and the whole thing is doomed for Mordecai and the Jewish nation. Yeah, so you got to be paying attention to God in every place. So on that night he could not sleep, and he gave orders to bring the book of memorial deeds, the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. So this is good bedtime reading. Come read me something good about myself that I've done in the past 12 or 17 years, please, because I can't sleep. And it was found written how Mordecai had told about Bigthaniah and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold and who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus or Xerxes. And the king said, "What honor or distinction has been bestowed on Mordecai for this?" So they read the story, but they don't read about how the king had honored Mordecai for it. And so he immediately is thinking, man, something's missing here. So what was the honor that was given to him? And the king's young men who attended him said, "Nothing has been done for him." And the king said, "Well, who's in the court?" He wants to know who's there so that he can seek some advice, because this poor guy can't think of nothing on his own. He's always got people around him. So Haman has his wife. Another irony, because what was the order? That the man was supposed to be the head of his household, yet it's his wife that tells him what to do with Mordecai. All right, so there's one contrasting idea that totally falls. And then here we have advisors again. He's looking for somebody to tell him what to do. Like he doesn't have a thought in his head about how to honor somebody when he's honored all day, every day. It's kind of crazy, but he needs somebody. Now, is that a coincidence, or is that just circumstances? It's circumstances. This guy, I mean, who happens to be there? Haman. Why is he there? Because he wants a bright and early start on his day. He's got to impale Mordecai so he can go to lunch with the king and the queen. Okay, so he's there early. He's been up all night erecting his pole, and now he's there early to get permission from the king. All right, so who's in the court? Now, Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to speak to the king about having Mordecai hanged on or impaled on the tree that he had prepared for him. So he's up and early, and he must have a good relation with the king. He's not even out of bed yet, and he comes along. Who's here? Who's here? I need some advice. And it's Haman, and he said, Haman is here, standing in the court. And the king said, let him come in. So Haman came in, and the king said to him, what should be done to the man whom the king delights to honor? Okay, so here it is.
Haman thinks
And Haman says to himself, whom would the king delight to honor more than me? Can you see his face? I see this little measly weasley guy that's saying, oh yeah, this day can't get any better. I'm fixing to ask to kill Mordecai, and then he's going to honor me, and I'm going to go to lunch with the king and the queen, and we're going to drink wine, and we may do it again all over tomorrow. I just can't wait. So this is Haman, full of glee. Okay. And Haman said to the king, for the man whom the king delights to honor, pay attention how many times this is said, let royal robes be brought, with which the king is worn. So not just any royal robes. This is clothes that's been on, that's carrying the sweat of the king. Okay? Let the royal robes be brought, which the king is worn, and the horse that the king is ridden, and on whose head a royal crown is set. So this is the deal there. When the king went into battle on his horse, the horse wore a crown too. There was no mistaking for anyone that was approaching the Persian army who the king was. If you wanted to come to the king, come get him. Even his horse had a crown. Okay, so what he's saying is here, not only is this a horse that the king's ridden, it's a powerful horse. This is a war horse. All right? And that the horse that the king is ridden, royal crown is set. Verse 9. And let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials. Let them dress the man whom the king delights to honor, and let them lead him on the horse through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. All right. So this is what Haman has done. He's taken his enemy, unbeknown, because the king never says who. And he's described exactly the opposite of how he wants to treat Mordecai, because he thinks it's him. Now he knows that every time he's walked through the town square, everybody stands up and they bow and pay homage, except for Mordecai. So the whole place, the whole city knows that Mordecai thumbs his nose at Haman. And they're probably laughing at Haman about it under their breath. And they probably had this idea that Mordecai, whatever ever happens to Mordecai, he's going to get exactly what he deserves. Okay, so everybody's got an opinion about Haman and Mordecai at this point, all based on this lack of respect that Mordecai shows or refuses to show any respect to Haman. All right, so this is the plan. Thus shall it be done to the man who the king delights to honor. Then Mordecai returned to the king's gate. Oh, wait. I missed all that. Then the king said to Haman, hurry, take the robes and the horse, as you have said, and do to Mordecai, the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. All right, this is the first time that the king acknowledges that Mordecai is a Jew. How did that come about? Okay, is he so dull that he's not making the connection that I issued an edict that says all the Jews have to be killed, and yet I'm going to honor one before I kill him. Okay, or does he not really even understand what he's done? Which, when we get to the story later, maybe that's true. Maybe he doesn't really grasp what he's actually done in this edict that Haman had helped him put together. Now, the other thing is that when he was hearing it read in the middle of the night, it probably was recorded that Mordecai was a Jew, because you were identified that way, especially in writings like that, because it was going to be there forever. So he may have just been repeating what he had heard and not giving any thought to the rest of it. We already know that he doesn't give a lot of thought to anything. He just kind of gets pushed around by everybody and then makes it seem princely or kingly when it happens. So anyway, he says to do all of this to Mordecai, who sits at the king's gate. Leave out nothing that you have mentioned. So Haman took the robes and the horse, and he dressed Mordecai, and he led him through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. So what was supposed to be the greatest day of Haman's life is now, it is fallen off the cliff. Okay? because now he has had to publicly honor Mordecai. Okay?
In front of all these people that know what's going on.
For something that happened
They've
years
been
ago.
watching it.
Yeah. And this is, they're all watching, and it's for something that happened years ago. It's like Haman's thinking, if the king had only done what he was supposed to do 7 years ago, we wouldn't be having this problem right now. I could have made my request. I could have had this guy killed. But nothing's going right for Haman, and it shouldn't. Everything that Haman has ever done to this point has been for Haman. And everybody else that has been performing in this story has been doing it for others. Even the king, as pitiful as he is not selfish in it. The only place that he really showed any level of selfishness was with Vashti, when she would not do what she was thought would be right. And you could say that he even had the right to do it. But it didn't show any capacity for compassion and mercy. And we don't see any of that in this story. I don't want to let him off easy. Later we will find that there has to be a back door built into this whole thing so that there can be a rescue. And we'll see how that works later. Then Mordecai returned to the king's gate. So he goes right back to where he was. He wasn't looking for anything. Now what was Mordecai? What do you think Mordecai was thinking? He probably thinking, is this a joke?
No, what's going on?
You know, what's going on? I've got a death sentence waiting. I got a death date. Is this some kind of joke that Haman's playing? Well, I doubt that Haman was laughing, about any of it. Mordecai, this is probably a signal for Mordecai that things are going better with the king than he could ever have hoped. But it has nothing to do with Esther at this point. It has everything to do with a restless night. And just happened to have read the right thing at the right time, in the right place, under the right circumstances. Okay.
Well, you said earlier how God isn't really mentioned in this, but he's all over it.
His fingerprints are everywhere. Yeah.
And Mordecai has got to see this. He's got, it's like all this going on. And he's like, only God could do this.
Yeah.
Only God could make
Yeah.
this happen.
So it must provide a sense of hope, because there's still that day out there, the 13th day of the 12th month, where they're going to get wiped out. That hasn't been removed, but there's progress that is moving forward really along a faith trajectory more than it is something that the king is doing. But the two eventually collide, and we're going to see what happens. And now that's true for our life too. Very often our faith life collides with the forces in the world that really do have a heavy sway on us. And we can't deny that. And fortunately we live in a country which we assume we have some power in deflecting those forces to represent our will as a country. But it doesn't always exist. There's always things that come against that trajectory of faith, where we have to see what's going to happen when the two come together. And there's always a struggle there. Paul described it where our struggle is not between flesh and bone, but with spirits and principalities. There's these things that happen, and so we have to determine for ourselves that no matter what, we're going to let God work in it. Much like Esther said, hey, if I perish, I perish. I know that what I'm about to do is going to be the right thing. And she based that really out of the trust of a religious experience of a whole people in that city. That we're going to fast about this for 3 days, saying, without saying, we're going to trust God in whatever happens. If I died, much like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, O king, you can throw us into the fire. And if we die, we die, but we're not going to worship you. So respecting the king while at the same time holding dearly to their faith and knowing that it is the more powerful. So some of that's happening here that we'll see greatly magnified through the rest of the story. Then Mordecai returned to the king's gate. But Haman hurried to his house mourning with his head covered. All right, same word that was used for Mordecai earlier when he was mourning, and except he put on sackcloth and ashes in a very public way, was mourning over the news that they were all going to be killed. Here, Haman is weeping in the same way and mourning, but he's hiding. He doesn't want anyone to see his humiliation or his grief over it. And Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him. Then the wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, so they're no longer his friends, they're the wise men. That's a purposeful shift. You know, they're moving away from Mordecai. Maybe we're not friends so much as we're just trying to give you timely advice. But they and his wife Zeresh said to him, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of the Jewish people, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him. So what is she saying? Here's the first testimony about Yahweh in the whole story, although he's not mentioned. But she knows enough, because remember, these people have been in this country now for over 150 years.
She says you can't stand against him.
Can't stand against him.
Right.
She has seen it. She's heard the stories. She's been around these folks. She knows that there's you're not going to overcome these people. If this has happened to you now, poor guy, because you've made a design against his whole people, and you can't bring down one. You can't even dishonor one. So this becomes really the first testimony about God in this, and the only one that we see overtly. And it comes from the mouth of Haman's wife. So it's an interesting kind of subplot.
Why did she tell him that before he built the gallows?
Yeah, well, I think what happened was there was still a chance that he could pull it off. He had all the money, he had all the wealth, he had all the great sons. Everything was, he was like the blonde-haired golden boy. And she's thinking, well, maybe he can pull this off. And things will be better for who? Me.
Yeah.
Yeah. She has a lot of the same traits
That's right.
as her husband.
Yeah.
Until this happens, and then now she's realizing, ugh, you can't even shame one, and you were going to try to kill one? So now it's she brings the whole thing kind of into focus for Haman, which it's really fixing to come into focus.
She would like to rise with him, but she don't want to fall with him.
Right, that's right. That's exactly right. So, and the friends don't either. They were his friends before, but now they're wise men. And pretty soon, they're not going to be anything. They're just going to be looking up at him. Yeah, so there's this whole idea. I'm going to bring Mordecai low by impaling him high up on this pole. That was Haman's idea. I'm going to kind of invert this idea of what it means to bow before me and to yield yourself before me. And then, of course, the very opposite winds up happening. So the circumstances are constantly shifting here. And we don't really have an explanation why until we take the 30,000-foot view and realize these are not just happenstance, and this isn't just coincidences. So while they were yet talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried to bring Haman to the feast that Esther had prepared. So, oh my, he still got a feast with the king. After all this humiliation, he still has to go to this banquet. So the king and Haman, and it's interesting, every time these verbs show up, went the king and Haman. It's a singular verb. And so Haman's kind of a tag along every time the king is mentioned. Meaning they don't go as a tandem. It's the king first, Haman second. When they went to the feast of Queen Esther, on the second day, as they were drinking wine after the feast, this is the first day. On the second day, the first day was the first feast, the second day is the second feast. This feast didn't last 2 days. As they were drinking wine after the feast, the king again said to Esther, "What is your wish, Queen Esther?" This is the first time he's called her queen. It shall be granted to you. What is your request? Even to half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled. So there's that doublet again to reinforce the whole power and strength that the king has. Then Queen Esther answered, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, another doublet, let my life be granted for my wish and my people for my request. So she makes, if I have found favor and if it please the king. If I have found favor, save my life. And if you want to grant my wish, then you'll restore my people. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have been silent, for our affliction is not to be compared with the loss to the king. So what she's saying here is, we have been sold for our death. Now, how can she say that? Because she knows that Haman has promised the king what would amount to about 60% of the wealth of the country. If you allow me to do this, is what Haman told him, I'm going to give you 10,000 talents of silver, 60% of the gross national product. Well, how is he going to get that? Everybody knows how you come upon wealth like that. You steal it. Okay, so she's saying is we have been sold for our lives. They're going to kill us. They're going to take our stuff and they're going to give it to you. That's what she's saying in that statement. Okay, she said if we had been sold as slaves, she says I never would have come even bothered you with this. This wouldn't even be important enough for me to bother the great king of Persia. But that's not the case. We're being eliminated. Genocide is occurring so that your pockets can be filled. Okay? That's what she's saying. Then the king, Xerxes, said to Queen Esther, who is he and where is he who has dared to do this? And Esther said, a foe and enemy, this wicked Haman. Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. So she calls him out. This whole thing has been put afoot by this man. Okay? And the king has to know now. It's all beginning to add up. Surely he's understanding, oh, wait, you're a Jew? How did I not know that? Well, how could it have ever mattered? When we go and look, not once does the writer or any character other than Haman, not once is anyone interested in racial anything with Esther. What is she? She's not dead gorgeous. Okay, well, that made that clear over and over. She's very bright, very clever. Okay, she's extremely courageous. The king has never worried one time what race she is. He is stricken by just who she is. And that's a wonderful thing. The only one that's got a problem with race here is Haman. That's right. Yeah. And his problem really isn't with race, it's with Mordecai. Okay, and so his assumption is, if that one Jew is like him, they're all like that. They're all going to think that they can dishonor me.
Profiling.
Yeah. So this is what we do. We do it still today. We'll take one individual that is of a particular race, and people will attach to the entire race the behaviors, values, principles of that one person, which is terribly wrong to do. You just remove any value there is in the person. What this story teaches under the surface is that there's great value in every person when it is of use to God, even if you know it or not. It's that place where you are surrendering to that and you're allowing God to have his way. It doesn't matter who you are. In any way does it matter. And so we're finding that. And Esther very boldly says, a foe and an enemy, this wicked Haman. So now, what has she done? She has said to the king, your right hand man, your second in command, is the one that has brought all of this to be. Yeah. So now Haman's terrified. Good reason. Okay? He's made an assassin. His assassination attempt was on the queen. Earlier, the two eunuchs was on the king, and it was discovered by Mordecai. He reported it. Now Haman's assassination attempt is not only on the whole people, it's on the queen, and the queen is the one that is exposing the whole plot. She's not having to depend on anyone else to do it. So lowly Esther at the beginning of the story in chapter 1 verse 1 is now, she's the keeper of the kingdom. Okay. And all for the purpose of exercising God's love for his people and preserving the promise that he made to Abraham. There it is. So, and the king rose in wrath or fury from the wine drinking. Okay? It's never good when this king has had too much to drink and starts making decisions. We've already seen what's happened with Vashti and other times. Okay, but he's been drinking wine, and he rises up in a fury and went into the palace garden, but Haman stayed to beg for his life. From who? Queen Esther. So, like I said, she's holding all the cards now. Okay? For he saw that harm was determined against him by the king. So he's already taken notice. Then the king is on a trajectory that means death for me. My only hope is to go to the queen now that I was trying to assassinate in just a few days. I've got to throw myself at her mercy. Okay, so he goes and he begs for his life, and the king returned from the palace garden to the place where they were drinking wine, as Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was. And the king said, will he even assault the queen in my presence, in my own house? So the king, too much wine, okay, Haman is there begging, and the king sees it as he's trying to kill her right here. Total, the whole thing is like a surreal movie image. It's just everything that can be out of sorts is, and the only one in the room that is in control is Queen Esther. As the word left his mouth of the king, let's see, well, I'm sorry. And he returned, and Esther was on the couch, and the king said, will he even assault the queen in my presence in my own house? As the words left the mouth of the king, they covered Haman's face. I don't know who they is, but probably the eunuchs that served there, because it mentions them. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs in attendance on the king, said, moreover, the gallows that Haman has prepared for Mordecai, whose word saved the king, is standing at Haman's house 50 cubits high. So don't forget, Haman's never had the opportunity to even ask to use this gallows. But everybody knows what it's for, except the king. He's still in the dark, but the eunuchs know, everybody that serves the king. But it's kind of like entering his presence. You don't tell him something until he asks. So he tells him, here it is, it's 50 cubits high, and the king says, hang him on that. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the wrath of the king abated. So, 75-foot pole meant to impale Mordecai. Somehow or another they get Haman up there and they impale him on the pole. And that's the end of Haman's story. Except for the effects that it's going to have on everything that follows. So any comments about any of this? Because it's really It's a fantastic story.
And
And
you love it when somebody gets what they deserve.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, somebody who has no mercy in them, searching for mercy and not getting it.
So we can expand this back even from this picture to earlier in Israel's history, when people came against God's people. Okay, so when they wandered in the desert, the Ammonites did not welcome them, fought against them, and so God said, don't worry about it. We're going to go a different way. We're going to go around them. Later on, he said, you remember those guys? We're about to take care of them. Then later, Samuel was to go out, and he was supposed to kill all the Ammonites, and instead of doing that, what did he do? He brought back King Agag, okay? And he spared King Agag, okay? And that's the whole thing where Samuel shows up, hey, what's that I hear? It's the sound of bleeding lambs and goats in my ears, and the whole thing about, hey, no, we just kept this stuff to make sacrifice. And he says, you know, to obey is better than sacrifice. Anyway, Samuel winds up killing Agag, the king, okay? Haman turns out as an Agagite. He's a descendant of Agag, okay? So we talked about that earlier. This is kind of like the final showdown between the Ammonites and the Israelites. So this idea that when you come against God's people, it's just going to be forgotten does not exist for God. His promises remain true. And so we see even in these very micro circumstances of individuals, is God meeting his promise. But also, as he did prior to in history, these people are going to be wiped out because they did not honor the request that I made of them, which seems kind of harsh, you know. Does God not honor us when he makes a request and we fail? Well, we have to think about that one for a little bit. Because probably so. There's probably times where God says, okay, I'm backing off. I'm going to let you go the way you want to go for a while, and we're going to see how that works out. Okay?
Pull out as much rope as you need to hang yourself.
Yeah. So that's a way of being able to say that I'm going to honor my promise to you. Okay? But sometimes it has to be done in ways that are quite painful. Then there are those that are going to come against you, and the reason why they are is because you're mine. And he says, I'm not going to stand for that. You can bet on it. I'm not going to stand for that. We may have to go around them for the moment, but I'm not going to stand for that. So why does God not stand for it? What's so important about you or a group of people?
It's all about the covenants.
That's right. He's attached his name to ours.
Even if we break our covenant against him, he is not going to break his covenant against us.
Well, that, yeah.
Now, we could be punished for it. We could be left on our own, perhaps, because he did that with the people every time that they did it.
Yeah.
You know, and when you go, you know, through, I guess it's Leviticus, it'll talk about, what is it, 25, 24, somewhere in there, about how, you know, you go ahead and you don't keep your covenants, and things are going to start getting bad. You keep on that way, things are going to get worse. But if you go ahead and you start getting better, then things will get better.
Yeah. Well, those that oppose you, let's say you're doing everything right, you're keeping the covenant, and there's people that are going to oppose you because you are.
Well, then God's on your side.
No, God's on your side.
Your end of the bargain.
That's right, and He is saying to us that those people are going to be dealt with. Okay. Now, on a salvific spiritual level, what God has done through Christ has said, sin and death is coming against you. And now for me to stand against that, you put your faith and trust in what I've done with my Son. And I will stand against it forever. Okay? And He does the same thing, even though we sometimes wish that God would deal with people in our life that are coming against us, Paul, as I mentioned before, reminds us our struggle is not against those people. Our struggle is against principles and principalities. Our responsibility to those people who come against us is to receive them, to love them, so that God can do all that he needs to do in this other place. So, but he deals in those terms in the same way he deals with these. Mordecai set into place something that could not be stopped. And people that had no reason, no desire to do what Haman had desired to have happen, are going to have to carry it out, because it's a king edict. Ultimately, people die doing something that they didn't even want to do. Caught in this squeeze where they had to do what the king said or die themselves. And so we see kind of the irony of that whole thing. One group is saved and others are not. But I'm way ahead. I don't want to get that far ahead. So we're going to just go a little bit further in chapter 8. I hadn't even read this part yet. I didn't think we'd get this far tonight. On that day, King Xerxes gave to Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. So not only is Haman dead, he has no legacy. There will be no memory of Haman in the land except for what we find in this book. It was all given to Queen Esther. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was to her, meaning that this was his family. This was his father's house, her father's house. And the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. What a crazy reversal, right? He's now second in command of the kingdom. And everything that Haman has is no longer called Haman's, it's called Mordecai's. Yeah. And who makes that decision?
Guess what? Mordecai was more loyal to the king the whole time.
The whole time.
Yeah, so it's like,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it's upside down, but it's all right.
Yeah.
It was upside down before, now it's being put right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also the people see that. So there's a precedent that's being established, of good. It's like, okay, if you go ahead and if you're the kind of person that Haman is, then you're going to lose everything that you had.
Yeah, that's right.
So see, because
That's the broad lesson.
of course,
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's not over because
Because
it's whatever.
Because the law's the law.
The law's the law, and you can't rescind it.
which is
Yeah.
crazy, because every time we look at when the law's enforced, it's not really being enforced.
Yeah.
So we've got this kind of up and down thing going on with that. But what we, in this kind of grand reversal of things, we begin to see it's kind of a foreshadowing that the power that is at work is something that's happening outside of this. I mean, when the sun rose on this day, who thought Mordecai was going to wind up second in command over the Persian Empire? Nobody. Okay? Not even Esther could have anticipated that. Her hope was just to survive the day and have her people survive. Even if it meant being sold to slaves. That's even a good thing at this point. So,
But the thing is even at this point, the killing still has to happen.
it still has to happen.
So they've made Mordecai.
Yeah, Mordecai gets elevated.
I know, but he's one of them that's still going to be annihilated.
Yeah.
It doesn't change.
But now Mordecai's wisdom creates the back door
Yeah.
so everyone may be saved through this. He knows that he can't. He knows that the king's law, the king's edict remains. But how do you get around it?
I guess I would.
Quite clever.
It's kind of premature. Oh yeah, you're going to die tomorrow, but I'm going to go ahead and make you a
Yeah, well, yeah. It seems kind of silly
Yeah,
that the king's not saying, "Oh, wait a minute, why am I doing this when you're not even going to be here in a few days?"
yeah.
But again, it's one of those circumstances that make no sense to us, but that God is interjecting a plan for all of this to come out.
Mordecai may not been able to give his advice on how to get around it if he hadn't been where if they hadn't done it too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's right.
He could-
Right.
So if Mordecai was still sitting at the king's gate,
Yeah.
he would still just be sitting there.
Right.
But what Esther does, see, and Esther does this. She brings Mordecai
Yeah.
to the king. All right. He's never met Mordecai. Even when he reports the assassination attempt, he tells Esther.
Yeah.
So the king doesn't know who Mordecai is. Esther does this. Esther brings him,
Yeah.
and then so the king gives everything to Esther. Esther gives all of Haman's stuff to
So
Mordecai.
he gets the ring that Haman was wearing.
That's right.
So he's able to give the king advice.
Yes,
So
and the signet ring
yeah.
was not unlike an iconic stamp of authority.
Right.
So when when the New Testament describes Christians being in the image of Christ, it's the same language that's used as icon, where you would have. It's like we all wear a ring and we're carrying the power and authority of Christ. And this is the kind of authority and power that Mordecai received. Just in an instant. And how did he earn it? By being in the queen's household. That's it. In this point, it wasn't because he called attention to the assassination, although that had gotten the king's attention early. He'd already fulfilled that debt to Mordecai by honoring him. In fact, he probably felt bad that he hadn't done it before. He's probably saving face in a little bit of that. But now this is entirely different.
Yeah.
Because now Mordecai has not only been responsible in a sense, the king doesn't know it, for how Esther has been placed. Okay? But he's her sole surviving relative. And so for the queen's relatives to be sitting out in the street, that's just no way to honor the queen at all. So that's another way of honor. That whole culture of honor and shame is being fulfilled. Mordecai is not only brought into the fold, but he's given the wealth of Haman, which he's already told us was a lot. He's bragging on it.
That was really something when it backfired on Haman when he got home.
Yeah.
The gallows he built for Mordecai.
Well, yeah, we gloat over him, don't we? Yeah, we like to see the bad guy go down. It's like a good Batman movie or something. We just like to see the bad guy crumble. Then Esther spoke again to the king. Now she's just free flowing. She's not asking. She's just laying it all out there. Okay. She fell at his feet and wept and pleaded with him to avert the evil plan of Haman the Agagite and the plot that he had devised against the Jews. It's no mistake that the writer mentions Agag here, because it sets the stage for that old rivalry there. When the king held out the golden scepter to Esther, Esther rose and stood before the king. And she said, "If it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and if the thing seems right before the king," so that's a triplet now, "and I am pleasing in his eyes," that's 4. All right, so she is really building her case. Let an order be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who were in all the provinces of the king. So she's begging now. She's on her face before him. He offers her his mercy by the scepter. And she's basically saying, if I mean anything to you at all, this is what I'm asking you to do. For how can I bear to see the calamity that is coming to my people? Or how can I bear to see the destruction of my kindred? Another doublet. Then King Xerxes said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hanged him on the gallows, because he intended to lay hands on the Jews. But you may write as you please with regard to the Jews in the name of the king, and seal it with the king's ring, for an edict written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked. So now he's saying to Haman, because he can't figure it out on his own. Yeah, he says you can't do away with it, but if you can figure out a way for this to be dealt with and it be legal, then have at it. Okay? So this guy's really strange. Sometimes he's a real legalist, and then other times he's not. But there's something about when he issues a king's edict and it's sealed with that ring, that's the part of his life that he keeps inviolate. And but he's looking for a way. So we see here, he's going to stand by the law that he's laid down, but we begin to get a hint of there needs to be some way out. There needs to be a level. I'm willing to show compassion if we can find a way out of this.
Well, now isn't that kind of parallel to when God does something, it's permanent. Okay, so the sin that we hold against God couldn't be unwritten. Could it? Okay, so God was offended by the sin that Adam caused. All
right.
Okay, so he cursed the ground. He cursed the land. He said everything's going to be broken. All right. Can't take it back.
Right.
Can't take it back. Okay, but he found a way through a new covenant with a part of himself that became human. See, it's all about the covenants. It's something that I just can't get around. The covenant had to be made. The atonement had to be taken care of in order to clear away this, to change it. Okay, so we're already condemned. We're not qualified,
right,
to make this covenant with God.
Right.
So he sends a part of himself, his son Jesus Christ, here to earth to do that for us.
Yeah.
So that was his solution to the permanence that sin had caused. Okay, so now sin isn't gone, and our sin isn't gone, but it's covered by this covenant. Okay, so there was a way around it without destroying the permanency of it. Okay, because sin's going to exist. Sin's going to exist. Okay, but it can be covered by this. Okay, now you say there's always a loophole in things. As you were talking about this, I was thinking back to like around 2011, 2012, when Jindal was in power. He turned down the money from the federal government for Medicaid. I don't know if you remember all that.
Bobby Jindal.
Okay, but he couldn't stop Medicaid. Okay, so he took the money he took the funding away from the department, so there was nobody there to take the application for people that wanted Medicaid. You see, he went around it. See, he wanted to privatize it all. But, I mean, it's, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole here. But the thing was...
You're halfway there.
The thing was that he he found a way around it. Okay, so now like with this thing with destroying the Jews. So now Mordecai has he can't take away the what the king said, but maybe he cannot pay the soldiers to go ahead and do it.
Well,
He found a loophole.
Found a loophole.
yeah. What we find in the rest of the story is that the Jews are able to defend themselves. So what Haman, in the literary style in it, provides us a lot of symbolism, but in the story, it's accurate. What the decree allows for is for God's people to behave as those who work under the strength of God. Rather than being victims, they're now victorious. Now, the price that has to be paid for that is something that nobody wants to pay. At the end of the story, the king's basically asking, how many dead are there?
Yeah.
So we're left at the end of all of this, a very sad tale in the midst of victory. There's kind of a lacking.
Well, you're given the rest of the book, you go through.
No, I'm not gonna finish tonight, but we'll be able to go back. I'm good at going back. We're not gonna go through the Purim and all that tonight, but
Get climax, all right, then.
yeah, I don't want to. I know I didn't want to go this far, but here we are.
I have a question.
Yes.
What happened to Haman's wife?
So this is what would have happened to Haman's wife. It would have been up to Mordecai what happened to Haman's wife. She would have either been turned out, which means she would have been on the street, or he could have been merciful and compassionate and let her remain right where she was. But you got to remember, she's the one that came up with the idea of hanging him on a 75-foot pole in the air.
Yeah.
So I doubt that was a secret. I can imagine Haman throwing himself down on the couch next to Esther saying, my wife told me to do this. I can just hear him now. So more than likely...
God, it was that woman that you gave me that
Yeah.
made me sin. Yeah.
For the writer, she's not even worth an afterthought.
Uh-huh.
Because her position, we see from the very beginning, even when the women are presented as not having any power, they have great power. Vashti had great power. She refused to go and set this whole chain of events into play. Had she not gone, if she had gone to that banquet, then Esther would have never been queen. Mordecai and Haman would have still had their problems, and the people would have been wiped out. So Vashti in her strength set some things into motion that you could have never anticipated. That's God. And then the way Esther handles herself, she could have done things the way that she had been groomed to do. I mean, she had a team. She had the all-star team that was teaching her how to present herself to the king. And when push came to shove in a very unpredictable situation, she fasts for 3 days and says, hey, if I perish, I perish. I'm going to do this. Great courage. And so she takes control. The moment at which Haman's wife could have called for at least a little bit of humility. Like, haven't we heard all your glory stories enough, dear? Go drink some more wine and go to bed. I'll wake you up in the morning in time for your banquet. She really doesn't. She goads it along in ways that... So she's the failing feminine. She's the failing woman in the whole story. What?
Did you look and see if he had an heir? Xerxes? Remember last week I said, does Vashti come back into the picture?
Oh, I haven't looked. I need to look.
Yeah, because for some reason he has a... Who takes after him? He has an heir, doesn't he?
Yeah, it is a son. I think he does have a son that is
But not by Esther.
not by Esther.
So who is it? Is it Vashti?
Well, it could be Vashti's. It could be Vashti's son, but she's not queen. But you know what? I'm going to go look. Actually, there's a book I'm gonna
Because,
I want to find it. It's online. Go ahead, baby. I'm listening.
Because she comes in to, I remember reading him consulting her as being Queen Mother or something like that. Well, how would she get that title if she didn't come back into the picture somewhere?
Well, I'm gonna look up because there's this book. In fact, it's
Well, he wouldn't have
Herodotus
son.
wrote it.
Well, no, that's right. It never says he had a son with her whenever he dismisses her. So I'm just wondering if they get, if some, after Esther. Is it?
I'm gonna have to
He's
find it
got a
online.
trademark.
I'm gonna.
He's
I
got
am.
Princes. He's got princes.
Yeah.
I am gonna look it up because there's actually a history of the Persian Empire written contemporaneously, meaning in the day of Xerxes, by a guy named Herodotus, and it's not in my library of stuff that I have here, but I'm gonna find it, and I'll find out because I may be able to look in Wikipedia and get it for you quicker. I don't know.
I want to read that.
Okay.
Anyway, that's it for tonight. We'll look at some more next week.
Yeah, buddy.
And that, if you're wondering what's going on, Patsy's showing off her
We
fishing
caught it on the
pictures.
noodle. It was a joint effort.
That's awesome.
Yeah, he was so